From Mexico to Argentina, the Pacific to the Atlantic, is a united Latin America the next global power? It certainly has the people, over 650 million, twice the US population. It has the resources, huge mineral riches, including 2/3 of proven global lithium reserves, and it contains ecosystems, like the Amazon, of vital global importance in our era of climate change. But to be a global power, you need, well, power, political and economic. And Latin America has never been united enough to build it. For centuries, Latin America was the property of foreign powers, its people oppressed, its lands confiscated, and its resources pillaged. By 1800, 150,000 tons of silver had been shipped out of Potosí, Bolivia alone. That's over $82 billion worth at today's prices. In the 200 years since, the United States displaced the old European powers and even gave a name for its domination in the Western Hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine, deployed to keep its southern neighbors divided from each other and subservient to US interests. Today, the so-called Inter-American System is run from Washington, D.C., where the Organization of American States is headquartered. But that domination might be ending. Across Latin America, progressive candidates just keep winning elections. This hasn't come out of nowhere. Around 20 years ago, after decades of US-backed dictatorships and IMF mandates, popular forces in Latin America claimed state power, in many cases, for the first time in history. In Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Uruguay, progressive governments and powerful social movements turned the rudder of development towards the people. Collectively, this was known as the Pink Tide. And they were extremely successful. During the 2003 to 2010 administrations of Lula, Brazil's first working-class president, 20 million Brazilians were lifted out of poverty. With Bolivia's first indigenous president, Evo Morales, extreme poverty fell by 50%. Infant deaths and child malnutrition, both, were halved. In Ecuador, progressive economist Rafael Correa's government, that I served in as foreign minister, more than doubled social spending as a percentage of GDP, and our citizens' revolution ushered in a boom in education. Pepe Mujica, a former guerrilla fighter and farmer who donated 90% of his salary as president of Uruguay, decarbonized his country's grid, which is now almost 100% renewable, boasting 50 wind parks and saving billions of dollars for the country's budget. In Argentina, Néstor Kirchner's government refused to pay odious debts or comply with IMF policies, crippling the country and its people. As a result, the economy grew again, and poverty and unemployment fell by 50%. But the countries also worked together to integrate the region, both economically and politically, to boost their collective power after decades of coups and control by the United States and international big business. New regional institutions were set up, and old ones reinvigorated. In 2008, Lula hosted the Latin American and Caribbean Summit on Integration and Development, marking the first time that all the region's heads of state met without the sponsorship of the United States or Europe. The result was the formation of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, in 2011, which set out to leave behind the old and worn-out OAS with a new space for hemispheric dialogue. The Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, went further. Sealed by a treaty in 2008, it established councils of defense, health and energy, and infrastructure to drive coordinated development across the southern continent. But this march of social progress didn't make Latin America its own great power. Faced with the ferocious counter-revolution led by local elites and the end of the commodity boom that aided rapid economic growth, the Latin American right led a decade of reaction. There were coups, with the forced removal of leaders in Bolivia, Honduras, Paraguay, and Brazil. There was legal warfare to criminalize left-wing opposition, preventing Ecuador's Rafael Correa from even visiting the country and putting Lula behind bars. And, surprise, surprise, when the oligarchs came back to power, their first move was to defund, ditch, and dismantle those regional institutions that once promised a united and independent Latin America. But that didn't last long. These right-wing governments had no plan to improve people's lives, only to enrich their friends and expel their enemies. And in country after country, the people had enough. They hit the streets. In Bolivia, after the coup against Morales' government in November 2019, massive protests and highway blockades forced the coup government of Janine Áñez to hold elections, which Morales' Movement for Socialism party won. They built new coalitions. In Colombia, they formed a broad political alliance known as the Pacto Histórico that united Colombia's social majority, workers, peasants, indigenous, and Afro-Colombian, into a shared political project. They beat back against tactics of legal warfare, like the Lula Libre campaign, which helped to free Lula from his prison cell and clear the way for his return to power. This rising wave of popular protest even reached countries untouched by the first pink tide: Peru, Colombia, Mexico. These progressive governments, now in power for the majority of Latin America's population, face many challenges: pandemic recovery, climate catastrophe, and increasingly, a radicalized opposition. But the opportunities for Latin America are vast. Living standards for the majority could rise again, with expanded health, education, and domestic industry building collective wealth. In that context, the project of uniting Latin America, building a zone of peace and prosperity, can come to the fore once more. Since Lula's inauguration on January 1st this year, there has been renewed momentum behind projects to unite the region and build its independence politically and economically. The region can take louder and bolder action on the world stage, pushing the interests of our shared planet and the global majority, such as building and sharing collective medicines production capacities, so we aren't left to the whims of big pharma's profits ever again. With climate breakdown set to run away from us, the global system shown to be an abject failure in the COVID pandemic and a raging war in Europe, the whole world can benefit from this progressive Latin American leadership. We could play a role in negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine and lead the nations of the world in serious global reductions of emissions. So, if Latin America does all these things, enriches and empowers its peoples, unites its many countries, and acts decisively on the world stage, will it become the next global power? Well, no, not really. Here's the thing: the peoples of Latin America don't want to be a global power that bends others to its will, dominates them and captures their resources. It just wants to use its enormous resources to develop in dignity, with respect for its peoples and our planet, and that matters for the whole world. If the region's peoples are able to stand up against the divide and rule from the global north, it means others can too.